told me that he thought that they were worried about me and I could lose my life out there. I wasn't attending their briefings, and so I should probably go on home. I'd probably, it sounds like I'd hurt my back anyway, and I told him I gathered they were uncomfortable with my presence, but I wanted to go into a place called Tainin before I left, and he said, "What do you want to go to Tainin for?" He said, the Kong control that area. I said, I want to go there because there's a leprosarium, and I want to see how those lepers are treated, because I think you learn a lot about a people by the way they treat the most degraded and despised and shunned in their social units, and I want to see how they treat those lepers. And he thought I was looked at me like I was a nutter, and I said, I need a chopper to go in there. Would you give me a chopper? And he said, no, we won't give you a chopper. We can't afford to give you a chopper, but we'll give you a Jeep with a driver. And I said, I'll get back to you on that. And I talked to some friends. They said, look, you really better get out of here. I mean, Jeeps with drivers don't work. And the last guy they gave a Jeep with a driver was found by the side of the road. And you've got a pretty clear message. You better leave here, because they're going to find a way to get you one way or the other. So I left anyway, went back, and then wrote some things. But the article that was probably the most damning was called "Children of Vietnam" and was published in Ramparts in January of 1967. My goodness, Alex, how long ago that is. Martin King was a subscriber. He saw it. He almost threw up at the Atlanta airport on his way to the Caribbean when he thumbed through it and he saw the photographs that I published. And when he got back, he asked to meet with me, and that, of course, started a relationship the last year of his life. I had been in the South in civil rights work at various times in the 60s and on the Selma March and events like that, but I'd never met him. I just was a young student from the North. But this then brought him directly into touch, and I opened my files to him at his request, and he just became nauseous. He visibly cried when he saw the horror of that war.
And that's showing the real humanity. People love to demonize Martin Luther King or go along with the FBI files that were complete misrepresentations. But I've talked to a lot of folks that actually knew him, and they say, I mean, you can tell those speeches, that passion, you can't lie. I mean, that type of passion comes across. That's why he was so powerful. It wasn't just the words or the tone. Martin Luther King believed what he was saying and was a very deep man, was he not?
Oh yeah, there's no question about it. I committed the last year of his life to working with him. He asked me to head the National Conference for New Politics, which was an umbrella organization to go over all of the peace and poverty groups and potentially mobilize for a third-party ticket of himself and Ben Spock.
And that's why they killed him.
Large convention in Chicago, over 5,000 delegates from all over the country. But it was subverted, it was infiltrated and subverted, and I introduced him. I was executive director of NCMP. I introduced him, and when he was speaking, I was passed a note that said, "You better get him out of here as soon as he finishes speaking, or we're going to take him hostage and embarrass him before the world." And that came from a black caucus. And one of the first black caucus, supposedly black caucus groups that was formed. But what we didn't realize at the time, that black caucus was largely being led by Blackstone Rangers and others who were on the pay of the federal government and who were there strictly for the purpose of using their blackness and black radicalism to take control.
Yeah, they want to radicalize things to then discredit. We're going to skip this break with William Pepper because I want to have plenty of time to talk to him. Here we go. Yes, William, I skipped that break. In the next 4 minutes, let's finish up kind of your awakening, then his murder, and then you're in a big lawsuit right now. We can get into that or talk about Bobby, whatever you want for the rest of the hour. Please continue.
Well, they killed Martin, of course, on April 4, 68. He delivered his speech against the war on April 4, 67, called me very late that night after delivered it at Riverside, called me very late that night and said, "Now you're going to have to stay with me on this. It's going to get tough because they're all going to reject me." And by that he meant all of his so-called former friends in the civil rights movement, because they were afraid they were going to lose their federal funding. And he was right. They all walked away from him. The New York Times called him a traitor. They accused him effectively of treason. But he was undaunted. He lost all that support. He almost was losing the support of his own congregation, who adored him. And he said to me at one point in February, he said, "You've got to come down here and speak to my people." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You got to come down here on a Sunday and take the pulpit, and you got to speak to my people, and you got to tell them why I have to oppose this war." And I said, "Martin, I thought he'd gone around the bend. You want a white kid from the north to come down and talk to your people? These are your people." And he waved his finger at me. He said, "No, you've been there. You've seen it. You tell them, they'll believe you. You've got to explain to them why I have to do what I'm doing." And he was adamant about it. And so I went down. I took the pulpit at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and I want to call it preaching, but I spoke to those folks. So I think at the end of it, they had a better picture of why their beloved pastor had to come out against this war.
And this is an example of the grip of brainwashing the American people were, when even black folks whose preacher was Martin Luther King, who'd seen churches bombed and people shot and dogs put on children, still buying in to the lie. And then people say, ask people to be leaders and stand up against evil. But then when it really gets tough, people get deserted. And
amazing.
It's just amazing. Yeah, please continue.
It's kind of like the rejection of the prophet in his own time, and that was going on. But we continued, and throughout '67, and of course, the 100 cities burned between '67 and '68. So there was enormous paranoia, anti-war activity, and enormous economic deprivation in the inner cities, causing great disruption and turbulence. And so the military in particular was very, very ill at ease, and they started to develop a plan, in '67 to eliminate King, because he was giving credibility to the anti-war movement like no one else had. He was bringing in white liberals from the north, and he was potentially threatening all of the bottom lines of the major corporations that were making fortunes on that war, as they do on all wars. And so he really became increasingly intolerable, and that led to his death. And when they killed him, Ben Spock and I went down to the memorial and then to the funeral in Atlanta, and Bobby asked me to come up and talk to him about the presidential campaign, because he had declared that he was going to run. And I just didn't. I said, "I've had enough of politics in this country at this point. I'm sick of it. I'm gonna go away for a while and do something else." So I didn't go to see Bob Kennedy.
Yeah, that's what Jesse Ventura just did. He said the country's gone and gave up, but you came back. I hope he comes back. We're going to join some stations right now, Mr. Pepper. Here we go. Talking to William Pepper. He's seen it all. Been a lawyer for the Kennedys during their campaigns. Well, for Bobby, worked very close with Martin Luther King, and he's doing so much. There's no way to cover it all. He's involved in lawsuits exposing the MLK assassination. He for years, most of the evidence we have of MLK being killed in the open and shut case, he went and proved. Let's try to condense that down and talk about your lawsuit that's taking place right now.
Well, we had, of course, in terms of the King case, when we became aware, in 1978, Abernathy asked me to go up to the prison and interrogate James. Actually, it was '77. I thought he lost it, because we'd all been convinced that James was guilty, and he had no reason to doubt that at the time. I guess again, it's our naivete, right? So I told Ralph, I don't know anything about the case, and it took me several months to read everything, and understand what went on. And then we went up to see Ray in Brushy Mountain Penitentiary, and I interviewed him for 5 hours. I put him through a lot of stress. Had a body language expert, a psychiatrist from Harvard, who's a friend of mine, Howie Behrens, come up, and he sat there. His job was to stare at Ray throughout the session, because as I stressed him just to see how his body movements were reacting. Anyway, at the end of the 5 hours, we all, Abernathy, myself, parents, we came away with a view that Ray didn't do it. He was definitely not the shooter. He demonstrated such little knowledge, actually, of weapons, why he had bought one gun and exchanged it for another. It just didn't. A lot of things didn't make any sense at all.
It stunk.
It stunk, right. But we didn't know what role he might have played. So I then started to go into Memphis on my own in '78 and started to snoop around. And that snooping around, of course, has continued for about, well, it's now 30 years, although it's virtually done. And I lived in the streets, went into shelters and befriended homeless people and drank in the bars, because those are the people who really knew what happened. And I started to get a picture of what really happened there.